It's Tehachapi time. Key Budge, Corey Costello, Ashley Whitmore. It's nice to have you guys with me.
And for like 2 of the last 3 shows, Jay's back in the studio as well.
Jay is
Can you
our
give him a
special guest,
co-host,
Jay Schlosser.
I think
Title
you need
2?
one.
I mean, come on.
Jay's
You
now.
know you're sitting across the hall wanting to be
I
in here
think
every
what
time.
I talk about is that interesting, but I question whether everyone else does.
I think that Jay is now going to take your former role as guest host.
Oh, I'm okay with that.
We'll save him for Trench
We'll
Talk when we launch that coming up.
I know, we're going to do it.
We're going to do
All right.
Trench
We're gonna
Talk.
do
I'm
it.
excited about it.
Well, this is actually the beginning of a Tehachapod episode where we want to talk to Jay, invited him in so we can talk about city infrastructure, things that we do, why we do things. Jay, you run the planning department here. So we want to talk about some different things that are going on in the city so the community understands the reasoning that goes into...
Standards.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Why do we do what we do?
Right. We've got zones. You've got a whole playbook for those of us that are sports enthusiasts like Corey and I. It's a playbook that you went through. And we had a conversation before we recorded today about a topic, and you went and grabbed the playbook and said, this qualifies under this because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And these rules and standards are in place. So we wanted to have you come in and we want to talk about some of the standards and the vision of the city and help people understand why we do the things that we do.
Yeah, I'm in that kind of classic seat where people go, well, why is the city not getting that done? You know, and I get the sentiment, I really do. The reality is there's more than one playbook. There's like 5, and they all form a tapestry of sort of things to consider when you're going to do anything in the town, whether that, and I really do mean anything. So whether it's building a new subdivision of houses, building an apartment complex, building a Walmart, which is a big example, or just moving a new business into a shopping center that already exists. There's a lot that we look at when we do that. That kind of narrative about, oh, it's just sitting over there waiting to get done really isn't very fair or accurate most of the time. It really is that we're going through and evaluating a lot of details that people just don't think about when they do stuff or when they look at a development. They're just excited. For instance, Chipotle's halfway built. I don't know if anybody's seen it here. I'm getting pretty excited about it.
We're all waiting for the 100% build.
Yeah, right.
Can't buy half a burrito. Yeah.
Or you don't want a burrito that any of those guys are going to make.
Not yet. Yeah.
No.
A dirt floor. Yeah.
So, but what are all the steps that lead up to that moment? And it's surprisingly complex, or it can be. And it's just one of those things that, I don't know, how do you explain all the moving pieces? I kind of wrote a quick list down here when you were talking to me about it, and we were thinking about, how do I describe for people what I do in a manner that won't make them turn the podcast off, So
That's right. Those people are already turned off.
Yeah, they're already gone. All right, fair enough. But, we look at things like, when a new development comes, we're looking at the streets, the size, the width, even the thickness of them for the type of traffic that you're going to have. We're looking at where a sidewalk will go, and do we want that sidewalk right next to the curb, or do we want it offset with a planter in between it because we want to make an environment where a pedestrian feels safe? The list goes on. Like parking is one of the big things that we do. That any city does. Do we have enough parking spots for the thing that we want to do? And if we don't, what are we going to do about that? Right? So, maybe to pause on that one, you'll take a Walmart, for instance, which has a sea of parking. We actually cut down the number of parking spots that Walmart wanted, just for the record. They wanted more than that. And we were going through that process. We talked to them about reducing the number. Plenty of parking for their needs, right? Obviously, I've even gone on the busiest day, right? The day after Thanksgiving, you still find a parking spot. But you come to downtown, and sometimes if it's busy, you might have to park a couple blocks away from the business you want to go to. It's not that we design it that way, but we're not opposed to that in that setting. And the reason is because what makes a downtown attractive to be in, part of it is the intense or the density of people that occur on a busy Friday night. Maybe not so much here. Tehachapi, we don't have that big a Friday night. But other downtowns that you visited that you maybe have loved being in, that the whole goal is that you're going to get out of your car and you're going to transit around the downtown. You're going to visit multiple businesses. So it's not that we say, oh, don't make any parking when you do a new business, but we are less strict about what's required for parking in this setting versus a different setting. So maybe that's a good illustration for you guys of the kind of the thought that goes into this kind of stuff.
And the thought that goes in, we're talking both, put that thought in for residential as well as for commercial. I mean, there's different codes, different zones that go into place, but you put in that kind of thought and the planning aspect for both.
Yeah, absolutely. Single family homes are usually pretty easy to do because everybody expects a 2-car garage at this point. But apartment complex, a different calculation. Or the new one now with the state laws regarding accessory dwelling units, or the ability to construct a little rentable unit on your property if you own a single family house. Those have the way they handled parking is strange and difficult, affects the way a neighborhood flows or feels. So those are complicated issues. Here's a tricky one for you because we've had it a couple times in the last year is mini storage units. So our codes say you have to have a parking spot for every 1,500 square feet of warehouse space. Well, a mini storage might be 70 or 80,000 square feet. So what are you going to have, a parking lot of 70 parking stalls?
Yeah.
For a mini storage, that would be a complete waste of asphalt.
People are there for
land.
5 minutes to get something and go home.
And so the way we interpret that is the way people really operate, right? So what do you do if you have a storage unit and you're going to go visit your storage unit? Where do you park?
Right
Usually
outside.
right in front of it.
Right in front of your parking. So we count up all the stalls in front of the doors and check that box, enough parking provided, because we use all the aisle space inside of a mini storage to run that calculation.
Well, that's smart.
Yeah,
Okay.
makes sense.
That does make sense.
Yeah. So believe it or not, sometimes we make sense over here.
Well, I think all the standards too, though. I mean, it's important to point out that whether it's a zoning code, whether it is planning standards, architecture design standards, landscaping standards, all these things were decided on by the residents in some cases many moons ago, and then updated as codes change and as, I don't know, trends might change and urban planning changes. It's not just like Jay decided one day, I want to do this, and he put it into code. There was public workshops involved. There was a planning commission approval, then the council. I mean, these are all things that people went and said and provided feedback and said, this is what we would like in our town as we set these standards.
Yeah, so you're speaking about the general plan. So in cities, that is the primary planning document for any city anywhere. And there are even state laws that require us to keep that document updated and to do different elements of it from time to time and update them. The general plan was adopted in October of 2012. I know the year is right. I'm not sure I got the month right. And that followed on after 2 to 3 years of work associated with that. And to your point, Corey, we spent a lot of money, a lot of public workshops, and people actually showed up. There are photos in the files of 75 people in the gym kind of sitting over tables and giving us a general idea of what they wanted this town to look like, right? So the big theme, in case anybody, is small mountain town. Those are the 3 words I use that sort of define all the lesser documents, right? Is we want to maintain the small town feel, and we want to connect what we're doing with our geography and our topography, which is we're here in the mountains, right? So that's what people remember. And so that sort of theme then is woven by the experts who write those documents into each of the elements as we figure out, well, okay, how do you design our streets? And should they be big streets? Like if you go down to Bakersfield, I think Lancaster's this way too. If you'll notice, like every mile, there's a really big street. And all the other streets are designed to funnel to that big street. And so the concept is that you're going to move from one place in the city to another place in the city by transiting from where you are to the nearest big street, and then you're going to follow the grid of big streets from there to your destination. Well, that works, but it doesn't really feel like a small town when you do that. In fact, what you create is these big mile blocks of walled off sections of community that are very disconnected from each other. Like, I don't know about you, but I grew up in the Bakersfield area, and my parents would never let me walk across Stockdale Highway or some of the big streets down there just because, as a kid, your parents are concerned for your safety. It just doesn't have that right feel. So you're disconnected.
It creates like a highway effect.
Yep.
It picks up, you become disconnected because you don't associate to neighborhoods and homes. And all of a sudden you're on a 2 lanes in each direction. And it's like, especially when I think of Baco, people are flying. And it's because you do disconnect because of those block walls that are 6 to 8 feet tall on either side. You don't connect that you're in a neighborhood or adjacent to a neighborhood.
Yeah. No, I mean, when we had kids and lived there, the elementary school was across a major road from the neighborhood I was in. I was probably half mile from the school, but not letting my first grader walk to school, no chance, And so, part of that, coming back to what we've done then, so when the town said, look, we want a small mountain town, then the experts start asking questions like, okay, well, do you understand what that means for traffic movement? That means we're going to have smaller streets. That means we're going to have more connected streets. That means we're not going to build big 2-lane or 4-lane, 6-lane major arterials and principal roads. We're not going to build many of them, and we're going to put in more stop signs, and it's going to take you longer to transit through the downtown if you're just traveling through, because quite frankly, you're not our target audience. Our target audience is the person that's coming to the downtown. Their trip is starting or ending there. And so we're designing it to work for them and not for you that's driving through.
Honestly, I feel like you've been very successful at this. We have people come in that maybe were residents 15, 20 years ago, or even people that just passed through 15, 20 years ago, and they come in just to talk about the amazing feel we have downtown now, that small mountain town feel. I think we've been very successful in going that route.
Yeah. Let me play Billy business owner for a second though. Okay. I know you want a small mountain town, and I know there's architecture standards, but I have a business that's going to change your life. I just need to build a big metal building.
Yeah,
I think you've heard this before.
Even though everybody around me has already built the small business, the small mountain town, they've done the architecture. But my business is different, and I'm just going to build a big metal building. Jay, help me out.
Yeah, we get those moments, and they're challenging because, when you say no in those moments, the instant accusation is you're anti-business.
Yeah.
Right. And I prefer to look at the long view on that, which is if we're setting a bar, that's an advancement of where we are, right? So here's the trick, is where to set the bar, right? If you want to make a nicer community, if you always want to be getting nicer, better place to live, improving property values, improving the investments people have made here, you're supporting the business owners who have made the investment. These are our chief aims, is these people who are here and have lived here and do live here, and the businesses who invested here. Where do you set the bar, right? So you want to make it better. But if you set the bar out of this world, then you'll stifle all growth. Yeah. If you say this is the standard, nobody gets to move in unless it's a Taj Mahal.
Rolled copper roofs. Yeah.
Yeah, and some communities can afford to set a bar that high, right? Because the values are there. Santa Barbara, right? The value's there, so you can set a really, really high bar. So the trick is finding where to put that bar so that you're not stifling healthy growth, but you are stifling unhealthy growth. Mm-hmm. And so the message back in that situation is, my personal opinion is this, that I'm doing more for the climate of this community when I set a reasonable bar, a goal, and then I hold that line. And that inherently means there's going to be moments where somebody comes in and just disagrees with where we set the bar and says, you're anti-business, you're anti-me, you're impossible to deal with, and so that comes with the job.
But when you do that and you do set, we have the bar set, what about when someone comes along and says, okay, I'll see the bar, but I don't want to pay to connect to these different things. You should waive it because I'm going to bring in all kinds of tax revenue for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting key that you bring up, a point that cities all across this country struggle with, right? And because there are classic examples out there of when cities wait. So what you're talking about, maybe I should back up, are connection fees or impact fees. These are fees that a new developer or a new housing developer pays when they are connecting their business or home to the city's systems. So you pay a fee to connect to our water system or to our sewer system, or you pay a traffic fee, and we collect those dollars and put them in the bank because we know that 5 years from now we got to add a traffic signal to the intersection of Denison and Valley.
Because your business is generating that traffic.
Your business is contributing to the overall increase in traffic, and so we're going to have to build things to combat that. And so that's what you're talking about, and we do collect those. So then there's this inevitable debate, though, about, and we get people that come in here and go, but I'm going to create some new jobs, or I'm providing a really important resource to this community, and can't you make those fees go away? You can legally with a program. You can't legally just because we feel like it. Because
I'm going to make it happen.
That's absolutely discriminatory and against the law. Should you build a policy to do that? That's a big debate in cities all across this country. Because here's a good example. Like Austin, Texas, waived a ton of fees and taxes for Compaq, if you remember that computer business.
Yeah.
All those years ago.
Shout out Presario.
To headquarter in Austin.
Terrible laptop.
Right? Well, huge boon for Austin for a period of time. I have no idea where they're at now because Compaq doesn't exist. So, but thousands of new jobs, and those jobs then generate new housing, and they generate retail and sales tax. They build up a community. Here's a general rule of thumb. You generally don't want to subsidize retail because retail businesses, they're not going to be here in 2, 3, 5 years if they don't have the retail base. So they are either going to be profitable or they're not, and your fees aren't deciding whether this community is going to accept that retail business, right? So that's kind of the same for restaurants, and then, the Walmarts of the world, like you don't, generally speaking, my opinion is you don't waive those fees because they don't help you. Like you can waive the fees, and then 2 years later, you've let this building connect to our city sewer and water. Now I have this obligation to build new wells and expand the wastewater treatment plant to meet those needs. And if they go out of business 2 years from now, we're out. Yeah. Somebody else moves in, the demand is there, we've got no money for it, and the taxpayers are...
somebody's fronting that.
Yeah, the taxpayers are paying the rest of that.
Or you have an extreme example if you look about what's happening right now in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, I don't know exactly what their fee situation was on their impact fees, but some of their water stuff was put in 1800s, early 1900s. This stuff was never replaced, maintained, and the system has now failed completely. There is no potable drinking water in the city of Jackson, Mississippi right now. It's a national crisis, basically. And a lot of that stems around not having the funds to expand the system when demand on old pipes is going to eventually, grow and they have to be replaced. Well, if you don't have those impact fees, and there's communities around us that have sometimes listened to developers who have said, don't charge me because I'm building houses right now. The market's really good. And if you charge me these impact fees, I'm going to have to charge more and people can't afford a home. So don't charge me now. Okay, makes some sense to get some homes on the ground. The problem is in 10 years when that system is taxed, they're going to have to go back to those residents and say, remember those houses, that 200 units that were built? They didn't pay any impact fees, and now our sewer system's our wastewater treatment plant needs to get bigger, so we're going to have to raise your rates.
Yeah.
And that's not
then
fair.
Everybody else pays.
Yeah, everybody else pays for somebody else's profit.
And I'd love to address that myth briefly because I hear that one all the time. The price of the house doesn't change. The market decides how much that house is worth. The fees come out of the developer's pocket.
Yes.
Not yours as a home buyer. Now, they do determine if they're too high whether the home builder will build at all, right? Because if the expected profit margin's too small, he won't build or she won't build. But so again, it's back to that example I used of where do you set the bar? Where do you make it so that we're making a better town? We're achieving the goals, but you're not setting the bar so high that it's interesting because California to me is a case study in this, right? So California has made so many laws and made it so difficult, building code standards that are set from Sacramento, not here locally. And CEQA, environmental law, requires us to do extensive, expensive evaluations of projects before they can be done, that they've driven up the cost of development so much that really the only people who can pay to play are big corporations. They're the ones who have the cash to pay the front end cost. So a state that sort of is so typically anti-corporation has ironically produced a situation where small business doesn't thrive or has real trouble getting started because the cost to entry is a barrier. And that's also one of those difficult moments of my job, right, is having to kind of be the bearer of bad news. So somebody's got a dream, right? They've got an idea of what they want to build and they've got a great idea maybe, but they don't have the money to get into the market. And then the bottom line is how do I deliver that message? Corey and I, we spend a lot of time, though, on that, meeting with those type of people, trying to find them a home, working, we know the folks who own property in town that have vacancies and suites and stuff like that, and we're constantly working with those people to kind of find those tenants a home. So
and it's sometimes even those sort of just infill or even just vacancy occupations, it's difficult when people, especially they may have come from an unincorporated area where there weren't a lot of regulations, and they just think, great, I signed my lease, I'm going to open tomorrow, and I'm going to throw a sign on the wall, and we'll be good to go. But like every other city, there's a process to go through to at least, get the business license, get your sign approved, so you're not doing something that is against those codes and those standards that the residents many years ago said, this is what we want it to look like. And so, again, that'll create some heartache from people who are used to sort of operating really just sort of willy-nilly. Now they got to come in and at least provide, a business plan and some, drawings of what they want to do and some architecture and, God forbid, to get a permit sometimes to make that improvement. So that's another issue even inside of those vacancies.
Yeah. We're very forthcoming, though. If you do come in, they're sent immediately to Corey on your end. If it's a business coming in wanting to find a space, Jay coming in to see you, they get those fees ahead of time, so they know what they're coming into. It's not something they're questioning once they've come and seen you.
Yeah, that is the expression of customer service here, in our opinion, or mine. And that's what I've talked to my people about on a regular basis, is we do have Customer service matters. We have customers. They're coming in here for a permit. It's like the last place they want to spend money.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. But the best thing that we can do, because I can't change the California building codes and what that's going to cost you if you're going to remodel your home or your business, but I can do things quickly to the degree that I can. I can be clear with you about what that process looks like as early in the process as possible so that you can count the cost and determine what you want to do. Like, that's how we best serve the people.
And that's kind of the economic development when people always want to ask about incentives, right? To your point earlier, a program for maybe you waive fees or something. We haven't had one of those in many years, decades, if there ever was one. And I think we found some old paperwork. There might have been one from a long time ago. But they asked, well, what's your economic development incentive? And we always point out that, well, the incentive is the fact that you're here and you're sitting across the table from a decision maker. You're not going through 14 different email chains and getting rerouted. I mean, time is money in your development. So the fact that you can pick up the phone and get to Jay or get to me or get to Ashley, whoever, is going to save you a lot of time, because we'll answer that question right away, or come to the front counter and have somebody up front answer that question without having to take a number and sit for hours and hope somebody gets back to you via email. So that's going to save you money in the long run.
I also would say, too, just a shout out for TPD, like one of the incentives we give you is there's a reason you want to come here. You want to come here because we have worked hard, and everyone else that's already here has paid the price, has counted the cost and paid the price to be here, and we're creating what we think is a really friendly business environment. Well, everybody gets to pay their part to be part of the friendly business environment. The perfect example, you guys brought it up a second ago, was signs, which is like the bane of my existence sometimes, because we have a developed sign code. It's kind of a constant running challenge to deal with signs. Well, and it's one of these things the public never sees, unless they don't even consciously see it when they go to a place that has really poor standards. They just it has a junky feel to it. And I'll let anybody who's listening kind of fill in that spot in their mind, but maybe with this thought plan in their head, you can think of the place where you've been, where the signs are junky, it's hard to see things, it's maybe just sign overload, they've exploded all over the place. And so you can't find anything because there are so many signs with people trying to grab your attention that you don't know where you're going anyways, or they're just so small or so out of place that like you can't find them because that's a place with no standards or no standards enforcement. And, so it's a challenge for us. I can drive around this town because I know the code and I can spot every sign and tell you every single one that's not right. It's a disease my poor wife endures. But that's a huge part of the fabric of at least the business sectors of our community, is that our signs are in the realm of where they need to be, so that no one guy has put 12 feather flags out on his lawn and is blocking 4 other signs to do it. That's... You kind of, everybody's got to play in the sandbox for it to work out well.
That kind of brings me to a thought. We start talking about underground and above ground.
Oh, yeah.
So as we have housing, utilities and things that are coming in, the standard for that is very specific.
Yeah, it's underground. So, a great example you guys have seen, and that's a challenge for us, because that's a big cost for developers, by the way, is how to bring utilities to your piece of land. Right, so water and sewer, that's us. We're here at the city. I know what to do with that, and most people don't have too much trouble with that because they know they need the faucet to turn on and the toilet to flush. Like they don't fight that one as much as okay, well, I've got to get power to my site. Well, how do I get power to my site? I got to call Edison. Edison goes, well, I can string up 10 new power poles to your site, and that'll cost you $100,000. Or, oh, wait, you're in the city. Oh, that has to be underground. That's going to be $250,000. Because it's more expensive to do it that way. And so then I get a return phone call from said developer who's saying, well, how can we do this so that I can have them above ground? And I get those moments all the time. It's not going to happen. These are, again, it's just like signs in that regard, which is, the places you've gone where that infrastructure has not been paid attention to, or it's just old and the infrastructure was all above ground and it stayed that way and it just has never made its way underground, which is not an easy thing to do. But you can compare and contrast that to newer built areas of any community where you don't see the power poles and you don't see all the junk that hangs off of them and you don't deal with a car running into them. And, we've had a few here in the city where you have the accidents with a power pole because it's above ground. It's they are not pretty. It's a challenge for us on that front. Our codes, when I started as city engineer 18 years ago, one of the first tasks that I was given was our standards were for literally the 1970s. And the standards is just what it sounds like. It's a book full of rules that says this is how you build sidewalk. It looks like this. It's that thick. It's made of this kind of concrete. It's what engineers live and breathe, right? And so, one of the first tasks was it's time to get some 20th century or 21st century standards in place. And so I set about doing that. We adopted the first major set of new standards in 2006, and that's one of the big additions, one of literally 1,000 additions to the standard was, look, no new above ground poles. I'd be lying if I told you that hasn't run a developer or two off, that cost alone.
But there were some even before that, even before 2006. Maybe it wasn't totally codified at that point, but there was the development over by Central Park. That's all underground, and that was really built out late 90s, early 2000s. So they may have made an agreement to do that, thinking that standard was coming. Maybe at the time when they came to the city, kind of predated all of us. But and that development now is clean because there's not power poles and overheads hanging everywhere, and everything is underground in that community. And that's an older one.
25, 30-year-old community that's held its value, and that's not a guarantee. Power poles don't decide whether a community is going to stay nice or not, but those are the little X factors, the little pieces that you don't think about, though, that contribute to the inherent value of something. And that's the point of standards. That's the point of setting a bar at the right spot, is they bring inherent long-term value because you're building a community that people want to live in and they want to work in and they want to open their business in. These are the contributing factors. It's a challenge. I think one of the biggest newer pieces is, if you build a development on a vacant piece of property next to existing power poles, we obligate you to get rid of those power poles. That can be real money, but it's the cost of doing business and it's the cost of building a modern city, in our opinion. And I'd even contrast that for you guys. Like a lot of folks, live outside the city limits. They live in a more country environment. Power poles, in my opinion, in a country setting are not at all out of place. That's not to say this is a one-size-fits-all rule and that, you should never have power poles above ground or anything like that. But it's right time, right place, right atmosphere because they affect that inherent value.
Now, as we look at businesses that are here, and one of the things that's been going on for many, many months has been race communications. And they are putting underground. They've been working underground every day for 6, 7, 8 months. Yeah. It's a long process. And I know that, they've been working within the standards and I think they were recently out on Tehachapi Boulevard by Mulberry, boring underground. Obviously a lot of work, but it makes a huge difference because I know when you say if things are up above, that's when it's in my mind because I see it.
Yeah.
And then when it's out of sight, I was wondering, I go, what's going on? Oh, they're boring underground. Okay, nice. That's going to look very clean.
Yeah, you can see some front yards getting torn up, then patched back up, but all for a better look in the end.
So they came to us about 18 months ago. Yeah. Does that sound about right, Corey? And we're excited. We're very excited to see race expand here in the city. It's a great service. We are fortunate enough here in the city to already know race, right? So some cities, get visited by a new telecom like that, and it's, they get promised the world. We know because right there in Bear Valley, and they've been. Are they also in Stallion?
Yeah,
they started in Stallion.
Golden Hills now.
Yeah, and so we know from the residents that have had their services for 5+ years that they offer a really superior service. So
I won't tell you how many devices we have going at once.
Yeah,
that just
that's Modern
bad.
Family right there. Yeah, they came to us and we immediately began working on procedures and policies for where they're going to go and how they're going to get there and how they're going to take our. Yeah, so that is exactly what you've seen. They've been all over. They prioritize doing the newer neighborhoods first. I think that was a business decision for them. The thought is that some of the newer neighborhoods have higher value homes, and so they're more likely to get a service client out of that. So they're making business decisions about where to go and how quickly to go there. But that necessitated that they go underground because there are no above ground power poles, and per our prohibition, there won't be any.
And the other telecom and internet, cable, whatever it might be already there, well, it's technically a competitor. So a competitor is not going to say, sure, go ahead, use my conduit, and then potentially take my customer because they invested many years ago to put in that underground infrastructure as well. So, the free market being what it is, I don't know, they might be able to get a deal, but there's no way that a competitor's going to say, sure, come on and use my conduit that I paid for so you can potentially take my customer from me. It doesn't make any sense.
It costs real money to make that business decision. And, and then elsewhere in town where there's existing power poles that they can use, we don't have a problem with additional attachment to that. But it's challenging. Some areas of town, just those I mean, you can see them, especially the older parts. Drive down an alley and you'll see the poles that are there now, and they're just kind of covered with wire, and so that presents a challenge for race. But they're working through that. Those are places where they're going to have to underground and to serve those clients. It's making its way through the process. So keeping that standard up.
Well, and I assume that they'd have to get permission to co-locate with somebody that already had a pole.
Oh yeah, no, it's a big complicated process between them and either the power company or AT&T, whoever owns the different. Yeah. Those are typically the two entities that own a given pole. Edison owns the vast majority of them, and so technically that pole doesn't belong to the city; it belongs to the power company. So,
and I'm just guessing, but if you're dealing with Edison, their priority seems to be, let's see, what is it called? Oh, PSPS.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Which started a lot of this conversation because the poles were deemed to be too old and they couldn't handle the loads. Yeah. I mean, the weight.
It's, Edison's in a tough spot, right? So they are learning a hard lesson right now. Unfortunately, it's a tragic lesson, right? When I think of like Paradise and some of these fires that the power I'm not blaming that on Edison. I don't know which utility was involved, whether that was Edison or PG&E or somebody else, but a tragedy nonetheless that, power lines spark a fire that ends up kind of tragically destroying a lot of stuff. And it's kind of unfortunately been California's story for the last 5 years or 10 years now. So they're learning that lesson. Where they spread their infrastructure and how they do it matters, and they need to have the proper scope of understanding about where they're going. If you're going into the whole concept of defining the wildland fire area, which was a state level effort, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, and then the tax that's not a tax that stopped happening to fund CAL FIRE. I mean, the issue is real enough, right? That tax notwithstanding, the issue of like, hey, California's experiencing a lot of fires. Is that climate change? I don't know. Is that just that we have moved into remoter areas of the state? And so now we are putting, human uses right next to things that easily burn. How much does that figure into it? It's a complicated issue with no easy answers, but Edison's busy, taking care of that for our safety, which is their dominant goal right now. It's a challenge.
But with that, it takes them a little bit longer to get to some other things that used to be maybe higher on their priority list. Yep. So now other entities, other companies that are trying to do business with them have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, if Race has made a call to them to co-locate on a pole, I can't imagine that's anywhere above the bottom of the stack, in terms of a priority for them. That's why we're working with them to give them the permits they need to underground their facility so they can deliver that service independently. To Corey's point, they don't need to share somebody else's facilities. They can build their own, and then they're their own business, and we're excited to see it keep going. So another year at least is my guess.
I think when we, what we've been talking about standards and the way we go about the way we do our business and the vision of where Tehachapi is, I've worked for other government agencies where it's more about the impact today, and I don't look to the future. And I think we try and have a nice balance of looking to the future and then also looking at what is occurring today. What's the impact? And we kind of look at those things in a much broader view. There's a balancing act that takes place.
I hope my long-term goal is 30 years from now, there's no the people that are sitting here doing, Tehachapi of the future, are not uncovering sins of their fathers. Because, and it's not to any fault of anybody who was here way before us. It's just the way things were, technology wasn't where it's at now, and studies and that sort of thing. We didn't know what we know. And so, we'll uncover random things every once in a while, and we're like, wow, why was that like that? That would never be, fly today. And so you're not blaming them, but it's just something that happened before. So hopefully, 30 years down the road, my kids aren't like, what was my dad thinking?
They're saying that now, Corey. Come on.
They're looking at him going, who is this guy? But seriously, I hope that's kind of the goal, and I hope everybody's sort of mentality is that hope we looking 30 years from now, no decision we make today should be, well, what's the impact going to be next week? The impact is where it's going to be 20 years from now. To Jay's point earlier, not the business that promises everything's going to be different, and they're going to come in and they're going to change the game, and they're going to be great. They might be great for 5 years, but what happens if something happens and that they go out of business, and then there's a building, right? And then somebody else comes in. Well, are they going to be the same way that you were? And we like to say that a lot to people. It's not you, it's the next guy after you that we have to consider. Are they going to be that same standard? And if we all have a book and a set of standards that everybody applies to everybody, well, then that we can use that across the board.
That's a really great point, Corey, because one of the things I do talk to people about often is I have to look at all the ways this building could be used over its life before determining whether it's a yes or no, not just the way you're doing it. Because people will come in and they'll have a good reason why some rule shouldn't apply to them. Well, that's not going to happen in my business. I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, and totally get that. I mean, usually I'm able in those moments to explain that, and people go, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, what if I move out of here in 10 years and then the book says this business can move in, and that business does move in, and now you've got a problem because I didn't put in enough parking because my particular expression of business doesn't need that much parking, but the next one could. Well, that's why we have a standard that says a building's this big, it's this many parking stalls, you know? So that's a really great example of the longevity that's required. But I'd even put tons of other stuff on y'all's radar screen. So like self-driving electric cars. How is that going to change the way we do roads? Or the retail apocalypse we talk about. This is the business model of all of us switching to Amazon on some level, and grocery pickup and grocery delivery. And as the world's changing a lot in the way we shop, and so how's that going to change business districts? What are people going to go to a store for in 10 years or 15 years? Increasingly, they're not going for certain things, right, that they can get delivered to their house for the same price as going to the store. So these are the types of things that we also, as we're adjusting a general plan or looking at how we break up the city into zones, we got to ask ourselves, where are things going? Or the density of housing, right? There's been a huge shift in generation. The dream used to be your 10,000 square foot lot with, 7,000 square feet of lawn to take care of because you were going to, with a big backyard for your kids to play in.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah. Well, nobody has time for that. And nobody has time to take care of the lawn. And so then we're fighting a blighted neighborhood because we got a handful of people who don't care. So how are people going to live in the coming decades? These are all difficult questions. And, the trick to being in a position to dealing with them is to have a policy-based organization, an organization that from the council down cares about our policies, not just the issue today. I got a phone call from somebody that makes me upset. I didn't like how they handled X. And if that's where we spend all our time as a city, then we've lost this battle already. Yeah. There has to be time for us to go, where's this going? And are we moving in that direction, or are we just scrambling around?
I can't keep chasing the shiny objects.
Yeah.
The next new thing that comes around, oh yeah, that's okay. We'll pass on our standards so we can have that because that's cool. Well, that's cool today. It'll probably be outdated in 15 years, and we're stuck with the cool version and the impact of the that's cool version. And so, yeah, that's where you can't just keep chasing because plenty of cities do. They chase the shiny object and they change standards, whatever it may be, and they pay the price in the end.
Well, if you give leeway to one guy too, if I come in later and you don't want to give me that same leeway, I'm not going to be happy with you.
Yeah, people talk in this town. They talk. They know.
That's exactly what lawyers do for a living. Yeah, I going back to the example of like race, it presents the perfect example of what we're talking about because like there's major regulation that's happening nationwide about going to wireless internet for your house, meaning you won't have a wire connected to your house long term.
You see the commercials now?
Yeah. Well, bigger cities are already getting it.
Yeah.
And so for the same price that you're paying for wired service. So do we get race as quickly as we possibly can? And, never mind the impacts when in 15 years, maybe the whole technology is different and the way you're delivered wireless is through a box that's on a corner street
which
light.
we addressed already
we do have
about 2 years
regulations.
ago because it was starting to become wireless 5G, and the federal government came out and said, hey, you cities, you can't regulate 5G. We need 5G for everybody, so you got to let them happen. Well, you can see some of the larger communities that let these just 5G antennas pop up on power poles, and it is just a rat's nest of antennas and wires running everywhere to now it was for 5G connected to your cell phone, but to Jay's point, it's transitioning into this wireless delivery to your home. But we found enough. We've hired some very smart people who knew, well, there are a few things you can adopt standard-wise. And so we adopted those about 2 years ago. We're one of the first cities to do so. I think we followed the city of Bakersfield, we work with them because they adopted some similar regulations. Just talked about screening and what they look like, and they're not going to throw a 5G antenna on one of our period correct downtown poles because they're not engineered for that. And so they've got to make we don't think that's going to be here today, but 15 years from now it could be. And so we actually already have the standard in place to make sure that you don't have a humming 5G cabinet right outside your bedroom door on a street light because the federal government said we had to do that. We actually went and made some standards to make it really be advanced. I mean, we're way before. We're probably years away from that first permit coming, but we already have standards in place.
Yeah, but it's a great case, a good example of how the world's kind of constantly shifting. And to the greatest degree that we can, we're trying to keep our eyes open to how that's going to happen and make sure that what we're doing now, to your point, doesn't make our kids shake their head in disgust with what were they thinking, you know?
You know, that wireless delivery thing too, when we first started getting the FCC was pushing this 5G thing. And I remember looking at and reading a few things and I'm thinking, this isn't about your cell phone. This is going to be about potential home delivery. Right. And then sure enough, the commercials are running now, like, get wireless router to your house. And I said, this thing was faster than I thought. And it's here. It's not here in this town yet, but it's in major cities already. It's becoming a thing. So yeah, you don't even need the wire. And what does that antenna look like that's broadcasting that to your home? So it's just a glorified cell network.
Well, we definitely learn as we go, and with the standards. I mean, just on a recent show, we were talking about the water infrastructure and repairing water lines. Mm-hmm. Why? Because
we thought throwing rocks on top was a good idea many years ago.
Vibrating pipes on top of rocks don't mix for long term. The longevity is not there.
Last as long. No.
So
that's right.
standards change, and now it's compacted sand around it, so that way the pipes can freely move.
What was the term? Water sonic. What was it? Water
hammer.
Water hammer.
So come on.
Welcome back, Jay, the water hammer, to the program.
Transient flow analysis. Should I give you some of the more fancy terms?
No,
I like water hammer.
No more $5 words allowed.
The water hammer.
No,
I think as we continue to look, and that's an example for me since we recently talked about it, was standards change.
Yep.
You know, and it's about looking at what we do, having a vision for the future, and looking at those long-term goals. Are those long-term goals obtainable? Are we set and going in that right direction so that we can meet those goals? And I think those are the conversations that take place, you know, short-term, long-term. But I see us having those and holding people accountable to make sure we're following those standards.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep. Always the challenge. That's what the job is in a lot of ways. You know, it's never fun to be the guy that gets to say no, but I kind of I don't know. I've been here a long time now, and I don't know about you guys, but I love the change. I think our downtown's amazing. I think our business district over on Tucker and the Capitol Hills area, they're thriving and moving in a good, positive direction. I think the variety of housing that we offer here is a real plus. Like you can find all kinds of different houses here, which I think is just a really inviting feature to our community. We're not just going to build luxury homes, and we're not just going to build apartments. You know, we're going to try to build it all so that the family, the single person, the retired couple, they all have a place here in our community. So.
Well, I know for me, I've lived in big cities, and I want a little bit more of a rural setting, a little bit more property for my stuff, right? You know, so I can kind of spread out. But what I appreciate is that if I need to come here to the city to purchase whatever we need, I'm looking at corridors that make sense, where I can all of a sudden go from point A to point B very conveniently, and not like if I was, say, in Lancaster, where I'm over here now. I got to go 10 miles the other direction to get
Bakersfield, same way, you know?
Yeah. Where we've got that 202 corridor, as you said, or you're coming down Tehachapi Boulevard, and it's just a very clean movement to get whatever I need. And the same for me to get in. I would think as a resident of the city, I can kind of just have a nice, quiet vibe and not feel the impact of all the people that live in Stallion, Bear Valley, Golden Hills, Cummings Valley, because they're not driving through your neighborhood.
Yeah, they're on the edge.
Right.
Yeah.
And it stays that way. So I think that's a smart vision.
And that's why there were standards again years ago to Jay's point in general plan that, you know, you're not having a drive-through restaurant in downtown.
If any listeners get a chance to, just regarding the look and feel, that change that we've had downtown and everywhere in the last 20 or so years, I know if you go back on our Facebook, it might be a couple of years now, Key, that you did this, but we have some great shots of the before and after. We've done some of this redevelopment and as things have changed. So it's amazing to see the change just over those last 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy the feel. I mean, I live in the rural area, happy to live out there, but I appreciate coming in and the flow and how easy it is to get from whatever it is that I need and through town.
And that's part of the vision. Honestly, that's purposely done. That was not accidentally occurred. That was part of the vision that is thus far successfully being executed as we find the right place for the right business or for the right house. That process of right-sizing things and putting them where they belong. It doesn't, it means we get to say no sometimes, or we have to say no sometimes, but then it always feels good to say yes to the right thing at the right time in the right place, because we know we're doing our best to set them up for success.
And they always, the ones that are willing to say, you know what, let's do it that way. There's a return on investment. 5 years down the road, they're still in business and going, yeah, it cost me a little more startup maybe, but yeah, things are awesome because this thing's built to last, or whatever it may be. I've got the services behind it. I've got the law enforcement, the reliable water sewer system. At the end of the day, they come back and go, yep, this was the right move.
Well, I tell you what, we've had a good conversation. Any final thoughts or questions for Jay?
No, I'm not allowed to give kudos. Last time Corey
You
gave me a hard
started
time
to-
over that, so I'm not going to.
You're first, but you started to.
No, well, I
Is it
tried
just
to
a-
refrain. I'm sorry.
Is
I
it
apologize.
just appreciation, or is it the use of the word kudo?
I think it was just, I don't know. It's just, we're making fun of Jay, and like Ashley's here giving like a serious, like, how awesome he is.
Attaboy.
Yeah, there's too many attaboys around here.
know.
Way
I'm
too
making
soft
up
for
for all
this
the
show.
time I don't.
Yeah, no, it's no problem.
Well, I think it's probably because Greg usually sits in that chair, and he usually just, whoever's sitting here specifically or over there, he, gives a hard time to. So Ashley's way too nice to everybody.
Yeah, there's
Like-
well, you guys, it's strategic. I understand the attempts to
Right,
keep me from
right.
thinking positively about myself.
No, it's not just
all-
you. That
it's,
chair normally is
know.
just,
We need a little good cop, bad cop, Corey. Come
right.
on
Yeah.
now.
Well, speaking of that, we get to play that all the time. Like Jay and I joke about that. People come and say, I want to do this. I'm like, absolutely. What a great idea. And then, I have to send them over to
Oddly
Jay.
enough, I'm always the bad cop. I don't understand. But I'll just, for the record, I'll say I was a nerd in high school. I'm used to this kind of abuse. I've gotten pretty comfortable with it. So
I like
it's
that
all
you
right.
said this kind of abuse, and you pointed towards me, who have not. I've
I
not
just
been abusing
vaguely
you.
waved
You
in
gave me
y'all's
kudos.
direction.
Right?
Yeah.
I'll end by saying, in high school,
Yeah, well said.
Well, Jay, thank you for taking the time. It was for me, very constructive.
That was good.
Conversation. Learned a lot.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I hear a lot of things in this hallway where the studio is outside of my office, but it's nice to put things in context. So appreciate you doing that. Anything in closing that you want to?
In closing, I'd tell you that it is the most enjoyable part of the job at the same time that it's often the most complicated, is to kind of find that path for that business. And sometimes that path is really short, right? It's just kind of a quick no. That's relatively rare. Most of the time it's a path of, okay, I understand what you want to do. Let me tell you about what we're trying to do, and let's see if we can find where those two meet. And oftentimes we are successful at finding where they meet. Sometimes the message is, look, you probably, this is not the best place for you. That kind of business is so impactful to the nature of who we are that it's just not going to be a great fit for the small mountain town that we're trying to do. Let me help you find a spot to go. And I like to report that 9 times out of 10, somebody walks out of this office feeling like they got treated with respect and their ideas were listened to, whether or not they move forward. So
We want a success. We want them to be successful, and it needs to be a success for the city of Tehachapi as well. So it's that both need to do well.
yep, raising the bar.
All right, there you go. All right, folks, if you got a question for us, for Jay, you can send it to media@tehachapicityhall.com. We appreciate the time you spend with us. Ashley, Corey, thanks for swinging by.
Thanks for having us.
absolutely anytime.
Tehachapod is a conversation about Tehachapi designed for the people who live here or who would like to know more about this mountaintop community. If you have a question you would like answered, email media@tehachapicityhall.com. We will try to answer it on a future episode of Tehachapod.